Hello everyone, welcome to a guide and overview of High Queen Khalida of the Tomb Kings. I played through the initial turns and got a feel of how the faction actually plays out. These are my conclusions, and in the end I'll show you some of the army compositions that I would try out. As always, not an in-depth guide, but will certainly help you out. Now let's go play with High Queen Khalida of the Tomb Kings. So for your short victory, you need to destroy the Silver Host, basically your first enemy, the Necrarch Brotherhood, the Drakenhof Conclave, or Manfred, the Sires of Morcaine. So basically every single nearby vampire counts faction. You also need to occupy, loot, raise, or sack 30 different settlements. Now, achieving this, you'll get a plus 15% casualty replenishment rate, which is excellent, playing into the style of recovering fast after battles, great to continue into the long and domination victories. Now, for the long victory, you need to achieve the short victory conditions, occupy, loot, raise, or sack 75 different settlements, and also destroy the followers of Nagash. Now, this may take a little bit of time. You also need to hold 11 settlements, which are basically, in essence, I'll save you, it's nearly everything from the desert, okay? And then you need to ensure that 7 of the following buildings are reconstructed. All of these are also in the same settlements that you should conquer. So, for the most part, you need to conquer the desert. That's the idea for the long campaign. This will take some time, especially if you gain some friends around here and then you need to backstab them. It's always a pain. So yeah, that's the sort of idea that you need to take for the long victory. Achieving it, you'll get Winds of Magic for all armies. It's great to ensure your casters almost always have good magic to use in combat. Now, Khalida herself, she's the warrior queen of Libadas, and she has a nice diplomatic bonuses with all factions. This is great. Research rate buff, which is excellent. Control to all provinces and ammunition to all armies. In essence, very good controlling the campaign stuff. So I really like her, especially with the diplomatic relations. This helps that you can get a couple better alliances in the long run. Now, in terms of climates, she also is a little bit better than other Tomb Kings, because in reality, mountain is suitable. You can see the influence of this by going here. I actually have this just for you guys to check the issues that you have in unpleasant climate and uninhabitable. It's basically the same for others. Ignore the mountain there because she doesn't. So you can see how much green suddenly there is because of the mountains. It's one of the most frequent terrain types there is in the map. So only going north will she really have an issue, but she's a better Tomb King's Lord to actually try world domination with. Your starting location is quite nice. You're on the coast, okay, although surrounded by your first enemy, okay, because they are both to the north and to the south, so be careful with that. Shouldn't be difficult to overcome that initial challenge, and you'll always be able to benefit from the sea for those goodies. Helpful in any circumstance. Now, typical expansion is actually to control a little bit of the coastline for the most part, including these here. And then going further into the desert, you'll find many enemies, but by then you should be prepared for any encounters. Enemies are quite varied, and there's a problem with this. It includes greenskins, Skaven, vampire clowns, but you'll also have the dwarfs, because Thorek, it's difficult to pinpoint whether he'll always become an enemy or not, but it may prove difficult to get good relations with him. If you can try, if you can manage, by all means. Later, with other dwarfs and other Order Tide, it should be possible, because for the most part you'll be fighting only enemies of those. So of course, enemy of my enemy becomes a friend. That sort of idea always helps. So diplomacy is always difficult to say with the Tomb Kings. They're quite neutral, they can go towards most alignments, either order or evil, even with chaos if they want. But for Khalida, it's actually a little bit better with that plus 10 bonuses with diplomacy with all factions. Since you have to fight initially the vampire counts and likely Skaven or even greenskins, you're most likely going to have a chance of good relations with the other Tide factions. So for that, be careful not to engage in diplomatic relations with any factions that are against them. So the nearby dwarves, Thorek, really, are kind of an issue, because you do need to conquer the Lost Plateau for your mechanics of the Book of Nagash. Therefore, proceed carefully to ensure you don't undermine future possibilities of alliances with the dwarves because of any war, for example. The idea here is if they do declare war, keep it as swift as possible, eliminate them as soon as possible, just to ensure that you don't have, a lot of issues in terms of diplomacy, of a prolonged war, too many actions, too many defeated armies or agent actions, etc. Just try to keep it as swift as possible if that happens. Later on, you may find yourself allied then, of course, with dwarves, with the high elves, or with the lizard men. You're one of the few factions that can actually benefit from the lizard men, and if so, get some flying units, get some of those nice single entities, get some artillery from the dwarves or high quality infantry, get some flying entities or high quality infantry, or even missiles from the high elves. Those will always give you good, nice outposts. In terms of mechanics, you do not have any upkeep in your armies. They're all free. Zero, zilch, nada. Late game, you can just support as much as you can muster. Instead, what you do have is limits to the number of units by the buildings that you have, such as this. You can see that it increases the unit capacity of specific units. So hero capacity used to also be a problem, but now it's solved under the mortuary cult. You can pay to awaken, to have more hero capacity for all of your heroes, which is excellent. This used to be a problem, now it's solved. Speaking of which, Canopy Jars is it's one unique currency that you have. You can get items for your lords and heroes over here. You can get more army capacity. It's costly, but you can get it here. So weapons, armor, enchanted items, talismans. These can actually change a little bit how the lord works, which is really cool. So yeah, by all means, keep an eye out for some of these items that you can get here. Now, the second mechanic that I want to talk about is the rights. These are currently bugged, by the way, but should probably be fixed, so they shouldn't be available at this stage in time. So you have the Great Incantation of Tahut, which is basically more Lord recruit rank for all units, and gives you a Casket of Souls that you can recruit, which is a great artillery unit. Excellent, really. You can also have the Great Incantation of Petra, a unique necrotect hero capable of colonizing runes at level 3. Do note, this is all that hero can do. He can colonize runes for you. This ceased to be as good because right now you can colonize runes without suffering any attrition, which usually you would lose half of your units, but now it doesn't. So yeah, it lost a little bit of value. I would love a cost decrease on this. It's still useful to get level 3, but yeah. The Great Incantation of Kassar is quite a defensive one. All regions belonging to you would be hit by sandstorms, causing attrition to any foreign army. So if you're under a lot of threats from many sides, just pop this one up. It will be easier for you to defend against any enemies. And of course, you're immune to that sandstorm. You also get more ambush success chance, and you get this army veil ability, so to get units with unspottable, with stalk, which is great when flanking, so it will give you a good alternative to flank enemies. And finally, the Great Incantation of Jeheb. This is one of those that you should pop up at all times. More Canopy Jars, more growth, which is excellent, less construction time, which is excellent as well, and the army ability of the Tomb Swarm, a direct damage ability, which is really cool. So yeah, by all means, you should always have these ones available. Now, one other mechanic that you have is the Books of Nagash. Now, defeating specific lords or conquering specific places will give you these bonuses that you see there, the rewards, and of course they're really cool. Some of them even change how the faction plays out. Some of them, for instance, like this one, gives you the Lich Priest of Shadows, which is a very good lore of magic. So yeah, basically try to conquer these all out for the most part. But I would love if the location of them would be a little bit better, because of course it's difficult to reach out to some of these areas. But for the most part, I would say that you can certainly get a couple of these, at least these 3 ones who are closer to your starting location. It's nice, and then of course with the others, by all means, try to send an army there. And lastly, army capacity, like I stated, is increased by the mortuary cult. or via the dynasties, via the research. So for instance, right now I'm about to get +1 army capacity, but that costs research rate. So you should always be careful with that. You should always be careful with the trying to avoid having to do this. For instance, right now it's on turn 1. I don't yet need an army, so maybe I'll transfer here and I'll wait a few turns until I desperately need an army, and then I'll recruit that. This is a basic strategy that always works with the Tomb Kings, okay? So of course it also means that I don't have access to these ones, which I could like, so it's up to you when you actually get that, okay? Just let it go until turn 1 and then decide whether you should really want a second army or not, because that research rate, it's important, of course. So in terms of province edicts, you have a construction cost and income from all buildings, also a campaign movement range for your own armies and growth. Don't neglect this one, because the campaign movement range is really cool. It helps that you can catch up to any enemies in your provinces, and remember that you have that incantation that gives them attrition, so it's really they're really good defensively if you can synchronize these things. Now they have a control and corruption, so basically just to control your province better. Ambush success chance and melee defense. It's not bad, it's rather weak. I'll prefer the movement range, for instance, if I may, but of course it's situational. And then you have casualty replenishment rate and recruit rank through armies in the province. So with the casualty replenishment rate there, if you complete the short victory, that's almost topped, that's almost max, so just with an edict and that short victory, so it's really cool. Now in terms of army stances, you have of course Force March, which I am here. You also have a channeling for Winds of Magic Power Reserve at the cost of 10% movement range. You have Entomb, which is basically your encampment, really. You have a higher defense chance. You need to have a 50% movement to encamp, of course, to entomb. You're immune to most attrition and enables replenishment and access to global recruitment. It also gives you that army ability, the entomb, the Sand Veil, which is excellent to have some units that can go in and attack their enemy artillery, for instance, or any weaker units. That's great. Now, we also have raiding. It costs 50% movement. It's basically the one that everyone knows. I'm sad that it doesn't give you Kamnabi jars. It could be cool, you know, just to add that. And you also have ambush, of course, with 25% movement cost. The typical basic ones. So in terms of buildings, there are no special buildings for Khalida starting province other than resource ones, really. However, Lamia, which is nearby and probably likely you'll conquer, does have a nice main building that gives you lots of research. It also gives you some more control, some income, etc. So basically it's a little bit slightly different than others, so yeah. Note that similar to the greenskins, every settlement in the province increases the local recruitment capacity by 1, and you do start on a 4 settlement province, so your recruitment capacity is really good. It's really good, and especially the initial one is great to have a military province with. So as for military, you have 10 specific buildings. These are all intended to force you to build more to support extra forces. At tier 3, however, you can build a lot of these already in the minor settlements, which is great. Now, you already have catapults, you already have chariots, you already have your top tier infantry, even some of your better cavalry and monstrous infantry, basically at tier 3. So don't neglect those. You definitely don't absolutely need to go to tier 4 or tier 5 for your armies. They'll just, of course, are better overall, but don't neglect the early game. Don't think that you need to rush to tier 5, because absolutely you can find out a lot of good synergies with these units on tier 3. Now, in terms of infrastructure, we have a control and corruption building, as well as giving some unit capacity for a carrion. We also have a growth, casualty replenishment rate, and corruption. Really great building there. We have an income and campaign movement range for your own armies. So add this. Remember the edict. Your armies will move crazy well to defend. They they're really good to defend your settlements. And then we have a sort of jack of all trades, like I like to say. Canopy jars generate control in adjacent provinces, hero recruit rank, low recruit rank faction wide, and corruption. So always really cool to ensure that you can, you can get all those benefits with just one building, really. So coming for the research, let's go in terms of the research. So I already spoke that about that small trick. So you have to start with these ones that increase your army capacity but reduce the research rate. And then each dynasty gives you a unique lord. Suddenly it's no longer telling me what the abilities they have, but they all have specific abilities, which is great. And of course, with unlocking this, you unlock all of this, and all of this, and all of this, for instance. And of course, this means that you can have different ideas in what you need in the early game, so that you can, it changes a little bit. So maybe you want to go for a second dynasty first, maybe you want to go for the fifth dynasty first, so that you can get, I don't know, construction costs for income growth in public orders, or more income from income buildings. It's up to you, really, whatever suits your main idea. In addition, we have all of these lords that are unique, by the way. So considering your legendary lord and the 6 lords that you get from the dynasties, you have 7 unique ones, rather unique ones, that will benefit your army, benefit from buffing different units. So it's really cool. And then you have the heralds. Heralds, of course, it grants you a specific ability to some units, so that army, with whoever has that herald, for instance, that army will be able to have, for instance, some Nehekar warriors, some better Tomb Guard units. So all of this means that you have a lot of customization in your armies. Even though you have a very small roster, you can enhance a lot of units in your army and plan these out so that you can get, the most of it. For instance, maybe you planned out an army based in New Shapti, give them the frenzy. It's suddenly just such a much better army overall. Even though it looks just like Ushabti, they're not the basic Ushabti, you see. So that's the sort of idea that you can have with the research. Also, honestly, one of the best. I'm glad they didn't change it at all for Warhammer 3. So as always, for your lords, we have the legendary lord or specific lord skills, the yellow line or caster or melee skill line. You also have the red line or the army abilities, or army skills, sorry, and the blue line or campaign. So starting with the blue line, it has replenish in the first line, which is great, and I rarely actually go into the second line, really. It doesn't have anything really that would interest me. Maybe this income, but you don't really have too much trouble. Attrition as well, so there's nothing really here that I would go for, especially because you don't have any issues with upkeep. Now, the red line is quite decent, relatively inexpensive. It helps, as Khalida has a lot to spend upon here. Remember that due to the heralds, the traits, the specific abilities, you have a tremendous variety of units that suddenly become great, and you can have varied armies with them. Okay. As for your heroes, Lich Priests actually provide the replenishment, and Necrotects can heal your constructs, which is excellent. Let me just show them here in the buildings. If I'm not mistaken, I can see them there. No, it's because, yeah, they don't show up there. So, yeah, in essence, the Necrotects are great to have under a construct-based army. And then, of course, you have your typical Tomb Prince, which is just a tough melee fighter to help you out against any enemy heroes or other entities, of course. So here we have the red line skill tree for the Tomb Kings. It is rather short roster, but they have quite some good units and can have some cheap combos within these skills. Note how both the low tier units and the elite units actually share the same skills, so you can benefit these early on and then benefit later on as well for your elite units of that kind. Now, Khalida herself has a series of buffs for ammunition, for instance, gives her entire army poison, which is great, and focuses a bit on skeleton Spartan archers, sepulchral stalkers, and necropolis knights. So by all means, some army compositions based on those. Of course, you can still give us some tomb guards to withstand the line, but even here, as you can see here, even just the sepulchral stalkers with the the scorpions can be a good deterrent, you know, a good front line while you flank out with the cavalry and have some constructs for support. Now, these are just some suggestions. Of course, nothing wrong with you going with a different, more standardized army. In addition, always note that I select just a caster hero and a melee hero, basically. This is just really placeholders. By all means, feel free to do any other combinations that you would like, okay? And, of course, any caster lore of magic that you prefer, and then you adapt to the army. This is really just because I always advise to have one caster and one hero, one melee hero, let's say, to help fight against the enemy lord or any other heroes. So yeah, that's why you'll see this very often. Okay, now a typical army can be based on some monstrous infantry units, like you see here. It can be based on just some tomb guards and just some archers, like you saw above. You can also get a couple of catapults just to ensure that you have some range, and just some tomb guards there. It's up to you, because many of these compositions that you see here, you always have to remind yourself that you're gonna have heralds, you're gonna have some specific buffs from the specific lords, so suddenly some of these compositions become much more viable. Now, nothing wrong with going just some tomb guards with some chariots, or just some constructs over there. By all means, get a full stack of constructs if you like this here. But yeah, for instance, this is the only one that I really would recommend bringing to Necrotex, because you'll have so many constructs, the heals will help, and all of this is kind of in the synergies for this. That's why, because for instance, if I recommend going with chariots, I'll recommend going with Camion War Sphinx, because they benefit from the same. If I recommend using Ushapti, then probably I'll have some Hero Titans. If I have some Sepulchral Stalkers, I'll have some Tomb Scorpions and Necrosphinx there. You see the idea? That's where I'm trying to avoid unnecessary having too many red line skills spent. That's the case. You can see here Ushapti and then the Hero Titans, because they benefit from the same red line skill line. So a little bit of effectiveness there. You can see only costs 12 red line skills to buff up all this army, and you can see that it's quite viable as well. So yeah, those are my selections. Of course, by all means, feel free to do whatever you choose. These are just for your intended ideas. So, for final conclusions, Khalida enhances the experience of the Tomb Kings. She focuses on different types of units, her campaign objectives, and better climate options. So basically, she's definitely one of the better options if you wish to go for domination. She's close by for that long campaign victory still, and she still can manage to go well in the mountains, which is so much more predominant in Warhammer 3. So yeah, this is definitely the faction that I would pick on if I wanted to go domination with the Tomb Kings. She is herself a nice fighter, and her army suffers less attrition, perfect to keep her going on the offensive, really. Now, it is one of the factions that benefits greatly from how unique the research tech is, because you can then compose different armies in accordance to the benefits that each of the specific lords gives you. I'm still bummed that it doesn't tell you what the benefits are. It used to, but yeah, probably you can find these guys on the website or on the wiki of Total War Warhammer. But yeah, they can benefit specific armies, so that's great. It allows you some customization, and choosing one or the other will be a major difference for the early game. Now, your army consists of good infantry, average missiles, good artillery though, good monstrous infantry and cavalry, great single entities. It lacks some flyers, carrion are just very weak. Weak early game units, it's overall the main issue. This has been solved from Warhammer 2 to Warhammer 3 slightly, but they still have a weak early game. Replenishment is good, finally, with the Tomb Kings, but climate is the issue. Khalida is better, so you suffer a bit less of an issue than other legendary lords, so replenishment for her is actually good. Now, I believe it is now time that you play with Khalida of the Tomb Kings.